Boom! We are live. Welcome. I'm Because Simon. This is Tokyo Tonight 2. Good to see you again this week, as every week at 10:40 p.m. Japan Standard Time. Let me very quickly... What does this button do? I'm a little bit afraid. Oh, I see. Do not want to do that. See if I can enlarge my windows here. Especially, I do not need to see that. Okay, well that's good. That way I can read the screen in front of me and see what you guys are saying. As you can see, I've been playing with the chat settings. Just thought I'd mix it up a bit and see if I can make it look better. This actually looks pretty good. So we will try going with that. Good to see you all. I know that there's always a bit of a lag on the recorded version, so boom, there it is, in case you didn't catch it right there at the beginning. And yes, actually that's quite funny because I was able to click on something and change the settings without destroying the entire live stream just at the time it was due to start. So yay me, got that one done. Good to see you all. Don't actually have a lot of topics this week. I do have a couple of things to talk about, including a book which I've been meaning to talk about that I reviewed the other week. Bunch of other stuff, some stuff going on with the news, but not a lot of stuff. I am hopeful, as I am always hopeful, that I'll get through this quickly enough that I can jump on and play some tunes. Who knows? But we'll see. Mr. Cordy Champ, I believe you're suffering from Australian internet, which is a pretty rough affliction. I hope that it gets better for you there. Yeah, I've been very, very busy lately. Heads up to everybody, by the way. I think I've mentioned before that I will be in Seattle about 2 weeks from now. Happy September, everybody. I actually got a bunch of suggestions. The challenge when you arrive in Seattle is that, you know, the time that basically when you arrive it's the morning, but for your body clock it's like the middle of the night. So you want to go to sleep, but you've got to stay awake all day in order to get into sync with the time zone when you arrive there. So that the fun part is always getting to Seattle or getting to America and then staying awake for that full day when you want to go to sleep as soon as you arrive. So when I went there like last year, I got a bunch of internet people like yourselves to give me suggestions on things to do in Seattle, and I got a list of like 30 things to do. And I made it through a pretty good chunk of the list, about 20 of the items. I was going from south to north through Seattle. I discovered I added too many things that involved eating and drinking coffee, although the drinking coffee is probably welcome, but yeah, I learned you got to take like one bite in each place. But yeah, I made it a fair way through, and I figured this year I've got the 10 things that I didn't get done last year, so I'm probably going to move north to south and see how I go. If any of you are in or around about Seattle, I'm not sure I will have how much free time I'm going to have over there. It will be for work. But I'm hopeful that there will be some time, particularly I arrive on the Sunday, and that day I've just got to stay up. So, you know, if there's anyone around in Seattle, you know, DM me on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube comments. Although lately I noticed I don't even know when I've got the YouTube, you know, messages and stuff lately. But yeah, let me know, and if you've got suggestions of things that are cool to do, I want to create another list because it was good fun last time. And if you're in the vicinity of Seattle, it would be lovely maybe even to meet up and say hi if it works out. So yeah, let me know about that. But yeah, not a lot to report on otherwise in terms of news. Maybe the first thing I want to mention is that I actually I met this guy, or I know this guy, who wrote a book, and yeah, he asked me to read it and review it, and I did, and I put my review up on Amazon. I've been forgetting to do my book review here on the show, so there it is. Let me put up there. It's Michael Howard, the Salaryman, an American dude becomes a Tokyo white-collar warrior. And I must admit, even from the title, I mean, apart from I used to have hair a little bit like that, I must admit, even when I started to read the premise of this book, and I know the guy who wrote it, and I was kind of like, oh, this is going to be a little bit like, it's almost too close. I've read books by other foreigners like Bayer McNeil and Busan Kevin. I've read their books. And they're foreigners in Japan, but they're doing fundamentally very different things, and they have very different experiences, so it is interesting for me to read. It's really interesting when you read a book by someone who is closer to what you're doing. I wouldn't say, I mean, this guy was an actual agent, he was an actual salesman. I've never actually been an actual salesperson, but yeah, he a lot of his experiences match up very, very closely to mine, and I would say when I was reading it, at times it felt a little bit like, ugh, like Oh, I didn't want to remember that. I mean, he's talking about his own PTSD, and it brought back some of mine. So to that extent, it's actually good. I can vouch very well for the accuracy of it. The book is probably more aimed at, it's very much written as if you're explaining what's going on to your friends and family back home, so that they get a sense of understanding what's going on in Japan. And from that perspective, because it was a little bit too familiar for me, I would say, if I was going to make a criticism of it, if you've lived in Japan for 20 years already, a lot of this will just be dredging up trauma. But if you're thinking about coming to Japan, you want to work in Japan, and you want to, get an idea of what it's like working in Japan, of course, watch Japan Business Time and all that sort of stuff. But here's a guy giving an account, basically, for the benefit of people who haven't done it before, going through probably the most, what I consider to be among the most hardcore versions of Japanese culture, which is sales culture, and learning it and going through all of the kind of cultural misunderstandings. Well, it's a lot more fresh. I've kind of dabbled in writing bits and pieces of my story, but now it's actually quite a long way away. It's fresh for him, and he writes it really, really well here. And the book, apart from being well written and pretty easy to read, he also actually got an illustrator, and so it's interspersed with these sort of comics and scenes, and it's very, very. It's another thing as well. I must admit, when you stay in Japan for 20 years, you kind of stop seeing the jokes. It's kind of like, I remember my mum came here. She would point at the signs, like with the funny English and stuff like that. I can't even tell if it's English or not anymore. I don't. I've lost the joy of realizing the funniness of those sorts of things. And this guy's kind of fresh, and it comes out. So I would say, if you're interested in working in Japan or coming to Japan, particularly working in a Japanese company, and just if you're interested in what Japanese culture or what it's like working in Japan at all, I think this is a really well written, easy to read book. It's free, I believe, on Kindle, but there again, support a dude, support the author, Michael Howard. He's got copies on Amazon, and for me, it's always if a book's worth supporting, just buy the paperback. It's easy to read anyway. And it's a really, really good book. It's actually you can tell it's been well edited. It's easy to read. I've read books by people expats in Japan who have not used editors, and there's spelling mistakes, and you can tell it's just been written like an essay in one go, and it hasn't really been proofread and brushed up, and this one has. It's a good read. The episodes are funny. The chapters are relatively short and digestible, so you can actually take it in little chunks. And it's a good book, so highly recommend. The Salaryman, an American dude becomes a Tokyo white collar warrior. Michael Howard. It's check it out on Kindle or the Amazon bookstore, or you can just buy it off Amazon, and highly recommend it. I'm going to put a link. I don't have a link there right now, but I will put a link after this down below so that you can go check it out. That's it. I haven't said hello to you guys yet, so let me go and see who's in here. I realize I posted the notice at short notice today. I'm gonna hide that one, and I'm gonna also hide that one, and yes. So let's go up the top and see what we have. We've got Sergeant Bilko, welcome, good to see you as always. Tai Nakamura, awesome to see you, good, thanks for joining. We've got Quentin Rankin, good to have you here. Tokyo 503 in the house, good to see you. Mr. Cordy Chap, suffering from terrible internet, also known as Australia. We've got who else? We've got OD Jr. Good freaking morning to you, and good afternoon and good evening wherever you are. Mr. Hiko is unusually happy today. Well, I am, because I did what would have normally triggered a catastrophic technical incident by changing the comments format right when the show was starting, and it worked. And I think, what do you think? What's the verdict on the appearance of the comments? I mean, this is just one of the settings on Streamlabs, and I like it. It fits perfectly. You can actually read the message. It doesn't get cut off. It looks consistent with the theme. I think it looks good. I don't know. What do you guys think? Tell me. They're in the comments. Remember, by the way, if you want to get my attention, I will always stop the show. If you @mark me Hiko Simon in the comments, it will pop up orange to me, and I will immediately answer whatever question or topic it is that you want me to address. James Kelly, boom, good to see you. We've got Yasa, we've got the J Vlog, good to see you. Salutations. We've got Chris Jack, good to see you, sir. The Illuminati gang signs, yes indeed. What does this button do? Asks Sergeant Bilko. That's what I ask every week. Believe in yourself. Good to see you. Your keyboard suffered a backspace out delete. Dan H, good to see you. Hello, hello. We've got Canyon Kodos, good to see you. Thank you. Thank God for the notification. So, yes, indeed, good to have you in here, Mr. Cordy Chap. We'll have to yell at Telstra, that's right. Well, yelling at Telstra, I find, improves everything, at least mental health. Fun things to do whilst in Seattle. Visit Vancouver. Well, I visited Vancouver a few months ago. And truth be told, I love Vancouver. I mean, actually, I would like to go back to Vancouver. There again, it is different when you go to a place for tourism as opposed to work. It's true as well. And I haven't really visited Seattle for more than like a day as a tourist. But yeah. Scotty Chipman, you should read Baye's book, particularly the first one. He's got a couple now, but the first book, Hi, My Name is Loco and I'm Not Racist, is just... I don't know. I read it with no expectations, having read a bunch of, okay, books written by people here, and I was just blown away by it. But there again, if I tell you you're going to get blown away by it, you might have expectations that won't be met, But it's a good book, and I highly recommend it. And who else we got in here? We've got Andrea Mulboy, good to see you. The comments do look better. Thank you, Andrea. I agree. I think they do as well. They are definitely more clear. Mr. Cordy Chat, butter. Don't do that. We're going to get to the butter. Just stand by. Quentin Rankid mentions it is a little bit hard to see the names of the commenters. That is true. I do like the appearance, but I suppose you need to watch in high resolution perhaps to be able to see the names clearly, and maybe I'll play around with the settings some more, but there we go. Yeah, couldn't rank it again. Then I could try changing it while the show is live, but I get the feeling that wouldn't be a good idea. I could try it, but okay, this week I'm going to do it this way. Next week I might try it a different way and we'll see how we go. Bald Berlitz boy, dog ate your homework. Well, your dog must have been very, very hungry. I hope it was home economics. Then it would make sense, wouldn't it? So, yes, indeed, they want more butter, cow, that's right, make all of that stuff. So I haven't actually gone to the topics yet, and as always, I started the show saying I don't have any topics, and I think this is going to be short. I did do a book review, so I haven't kind of done one thing, but I've done one topic, and we're already 25 minutes or 20 minutes into it. So I should probably start on the topics that I have, because as usual, it's going to be a rush to the end. So first thing, and I'm kind of going in reverse order this week. I know lately I've always done it where I start with the newest topics and then I move to the topics I least remember. This week I'm going to go sequentially. I figured out I added my topics so that the oldest ones would come first. I do really want to talk about Hong Kong, which we're going to talk about at the end. I have included links for it, so I will get through that. Canyon Kodos, be careful, but there we go. Yes, indeed. Yes, the old chestnut about Japanese people always being on time, but indeed, except when it comes to going home, and I suppose it's this very fuzzy concept, and it's kind of true. And Japanese people talk about that they find it hard to respond to, but it's this idea that you always have to be seen to be putting extra effort in, and this is kind of what's drummed in, all the way from being a kid in Japan all the way up. The other thing which I also find, even now 20 years, I still find frustrating in Japan, but it's kind of funny how it works, is when you allocate time for a meeting in Japan, like 1 hour for a meeting, in my world, where I've got every day I've got more tasks on my plate than I can complete in a day. So, if you can finish a meeting early, if you can get the agenda clear, if you don't need the full hour, you finish early. I mean, I use the expression, I'll give you your time back. Time is valuable. In Japan, it's funny, if you take an hour, like you're under an obligation as the person requesting the meeting to make sure that hour is fully used. Even if you discover early on that, the thing that you needed, actually you don't need after all. People will still okay, let's talk about this other thing instead. And they will magically, just in the same way that people often stand up at the same time after a meal, they'll move together or whatever. Yeah, they'll fill up the hour exactly. And even sometimes when I'm trying to deliberately, where I'm in charge of the meeting or I called it and I'm trying to cut it short, other people in the room will just feel uneasy, like they'll think I've blocked out this hour, I don't want to be back at my desk until this is up. No, they'll fill it up, and it's a magical thing. But yes, the idea that Japanese are timely applies for everything except going home, and that is that is true. I think it's I'm learning as well. When you have family, when you want to see your kid, your life rhythm gets changed by that. And I used to be very much like other people that I work with, where I would wake up late and I would have dinner in the evening, and I'd sort of pace myself, and I'd get work done late, come in late, leave late was kind of how I'd do things. Again, I was at a law firm, so you don't get work come in the morning, and the principle is that you're not supposed to leave without work completely done. So it was kind of as a different rhythm, but I do try to get out by a certain time. I make a principle of trying to see my son every night, unless there's some really good reason I can't, like something I've got to go to. So but for most people, definitely there is this thing about staying till 9 p.m. So Dan H, do you get paid more for this extra time you work? Non-managers do get paid extra. And there are limits on how much overtime they're allowed to do, because this is such a problem. So now the Ministry of Health does go and audit most large companies to track overtime, which means that by law, on average, you can't be staying more than 8 p.m. every night, or else the company will get in trouble, of course. And there's the other problem about companies forcing their employees to work less. The other... but if you're a manager, it doesn't make a difference. And this is the other thing as well, the old thing about Japanese companies, where people stay because the boss is still there, and the boss is still there because he doesn't want to go home, and that's pretty common as well. So, yes. And I see people chatting to each other, not asking me that question about being an Oz, because I'm not an Oz, but that's right. So anyway, Mr. Cordy Chap says bull. I suppose maybe it is, but anyway, Team Gaijin in Japan, we just broke the 2%. We are now 2.7 million foreigners in Japan. Most of them live in cities. Like everything else, all the young people, all the working population, of course it's natural that we come to Japan, but there we go. Japan's population of 127,443,563 as of January 1, 2019. Now the number of foreigners in that is 2,667,199. One of them right here. 2.09% of the total population. So when I came to Japan, it was like 1%. So it's changed dramatically. The breakdown of those foreigners has changed a lot as well. But yeah, predominantly young, predominantly working in the cities. I still believe, and does it have the information here? I see these are towns in Japan with the highest, municipalities with the highest proportion of foreigners. And this is interesting. In Hokkaido, I would have thought, and I wonder if this is part of Niseko, Shimukapu. Interesting name as well. I'm guessing it's an Ainu language type name. But there we go. I believe up in Hokkaido, those resorts are full of Australians, and that's partly... Well, there's Niseko down there, is 11.88%. So a lot in Hokkaido. But... foreigners are increasing numbers of Vietnamese. I mean, there were like no Vietnamese here when I first got here, and now they're like the third biggest group here. Dan H will soon be 100%. Slowly over time, but I guess I'll have to change the rules part way through, but yes, we'll see what happens. Okay, you were waiting for it. So as you're all aware, if you follow my Twitter, I have been following with anticipation and rage what has been going on with the trade negotiations. Andrea's already ahead of the ball there, talking with the corn symbols. Yes, America has a couple of problems. One, it decided at the last minute to trash the free trade treaty that it made, that Japan joined. And for me, the TPP ended up being flawed because, Japan was able to, of course, protect itself, or protect its incompetent, lazy, understaffed, and unproductive, communist, failed production system dairy farmers that are unable to supply the country with adequate dairy, and frequently suffer shortages and rationing and queues, just like the Soviet Union. And in spite of all of that, Japan decided that it still had to protect that dairy industry from imports and foreign competition, And so the TPP, of course, while it covered lots of cool stuff that is going to be cheaper, that did not cover dairy. So America dropped out of that treaty, which is a little bit silly. But now they're negotiating a deal with Japan, and the only condition of this new deal that Japan's going to do with America is that they have to get whatever they would have gotten on the TPP and a little bit extra. And Japan's argued that, they spent 2 years negotiating with America the terms on agriculture, but they have to give a little bit extra. And I'm like, okay, second chance. Now, it's not New Zealand butter, which I would have liked to have gotten as a patriotic, not really, but stuff that isn't plastic and orange, I would have preferred. But look, if it's American butter, I don't care, right? I mean, Americans have cookies, they have biscuits, they have crumpets, I assume, that they put butter onto. So if it's American butter, I can live with that, and I am fully supporting the US administration trying to get Japan to give it more butter. The problem is that, yes, America has another problem, which is that due to its current trade situation with China, it has a bunch of corn feed. Now, I thought originally this was a corn that humans eat, but apparently it's not. This is corn for animals and whatnot that they were planning to sell to China. They can now no longer sell to China because of the trade war thing. So they've got all this extra corn lying around in Japan and said, hey, we'll buy all of that corn if you don't put tariffs on our cars. And apparently they've done a deal on that, although the overall terms, they've got a broad agreement. It still isn't clear whether we took butter for corn or not. And if we did, I mean, that would be ridiculous, because a lot of people are saying this corn feed, if Japan buys it, they're just going to be buying it as a bribe to protect the auto industry from Trump going and beating up Honda Civics like in the 1980s. And Japan's probably going to send the corn feed. Well, I was terrified. If this was real corn, I was worried. I mean, the pizzas here already have enough corn. They couldn't hold any more corn, and I really didn't want us to get down into that. But if it's corn feed, I've heard people say they're probably just going to export it on as aid to developing countries, and give it away, which may be the case. I mean, feed the cows that make the milk. I mean, just throwing some ideas out there. In any case, we are going to be in September, which it is now September, so sometime this month there will be an announcement. And I tell you what, we had better not have sold out. I know this was to protect the auto industry, but if Japan is going to continue to suffer from dairy shortages in exchange for, corn feed for animals, it doesn't make any sense. Hopefully, USA, please, you guys do something. But yes, for now we are going to be flooded with corn as a favor for Trump, basically to appease him over cars. It's very, very complicated, but I have heard that there is a bilateral trade deal that's been negotiated, and I'm hoping that we will get rid of these these ridiculous dairy tariffs that Japan has. Dan H asks a question: wouldn't this lower Japan food safety standards and affect the agricultural relationship with Europe? Well, it depends on the substance. Oh, you mean GMO corn? Well, I don't know that GMO corn is specifically regulated in Japan, and frankly, I'm kind of quasi-sympathetic to the hysteria about GMO, but I find the debate around it also kind of unscientific. And remember, again, we are talking about animal feed. I don't know that Japan has anti-GMO specific. Maybe it does, but in any case, this is America. America defends Japan. They'll have to buy it. The main thing about food safety in America is, of course, with beef. When they found mad cow disease in America, and the Americans wouldn't remove the spine from carcasses, they wouldn't improve their meat processing standards, that caused American beef to become blocked from Japan for a time. And that caused all sorts of angst, and I think we're going to get past that particular one, but yeah, I don't know about the relationship. I mean, frankly, Europe has such sheltered, protected agriculture anyway, and they use all sorts of excuses. But frankly, they've got a similar, very, very managed system. I mean, the CAP in Europe is just a joke. The mountains of butter. Well, they have, that's it. They do have mountains of butter, I suppose. But they have mountains. That's the first thing that just popped out. But the wine mountain, the cheese mountain, the tomato mountain that Europeans have. But at least they have a problem with too much, which is different to Japan. Quint Rankin, what are you planning on doing without butter? Well, ask me about my life. I mean, tomorrow I'm planning to catch a subway to work. This is what I'm doing without butter. It's my life. I'm just going to continue to be angry. What can I do? Andrea Morwood, just say quotes from Aussie movie The Castle. I'm not sure I properly got the context of that, but I think I know. It's the vibe. It's the vibe. It's not the right or wrong about it. It's the vibe. Yeah, well, The Castle, watching The Castle as a New Zealander and as a lawyer who works with Australians, I enjoyed the movie very much. If you're not an Australian, you should watch it. It's a good Australian movie. One of many good Australian movies actually, but it's a particularly good one. But there again, what they're talking about in that movie as a New Zealander is so completely basic. And the fact that it's so sensitive and controversial still in Australia. Australia's got a ways to go, but it's a good movie. So yes, thank you for that, Andrea. Quint, rank it. Corn oil-based margarine. It's not the same. No, see, this is the problem. Again, this is my upbringing. I come from a agricultural country, and so we're taught that margarine gives you cholesterol and cancer. But who knows? I mean, it might be good. Who knows what could happen with it? But butter. I mean, how hard can it be? They have, New Zealand produces like soft butter. You should check it out if it's not blocked from imports where you live, like in New Zealand. But yes, Dan H asking, have I seen, I guess, an Australian TV show Rake? I have not. I have not even heard of it. I'm going to Australia at the end of the year. In fact, I'm going to Melbourne at the end of the year, which should be fun. First time I've been there in like 30 years. I'm going to go check out the old homes and the cuzzies and everything there. But I will make a point of going and checking it out. Andrea, indeed, mainland tasty cheese. Particularly the vintage, but you can't really get good cheddar like that in Japan. But that is, well, I showed that to my French friends, but French friends apparently consider cheddar cheese is to cheese as I think margarine is to butter. It just doesn't work for them. But hey, all the more for me. Yes, indeed. Good call there, Andrea. Anyway, speaking of food, and not corn, I suppose, but Alicia Ivalich. You know what? I always thought of that as Ivalich, but I remember I caught up with her the other week, and she reminded me it's Ivalich. So yes, she has written another story in the Japan Times covering vegetarian food of the capital. The thing about this to always be really super careful about is that in Tokyo there are lots of vegetable restaurants, but they're not necessarily vegetarian restaurants. Japanese just don't get the concept of vegetarian. Why would you deny yourself? Well, I mean, one, you don't have to be vegetarian to enjoy good vegetables, which I must admit as a New Zealander I thought you had to be. Vegetables were kind of a last resort where I grew up, and it wasn't really till I came to Japan that I discovered that Andrea, I would love to, but I'm going to be on family duties while there, so we'll see. Hopefully if I can carve out some time, it would be very nice to catch up with the Melbourne crowd, to the extent I know that there are a few of you there. But yes, this whole idea, Tokyo is a paradise if you're not a vegetarian but you love vegetables, because there's all of these fantastic vegetable restaurants that have this amazing vegetables for a start that are cooked in amazing ways. And if you're lucky, some of it can be, and it draws in vegetarians who get caught off guard because it won't be vegan compliant food a lot of the time. However, there are increasing vegan options and vegan restaurants as well. But what Alicia here has done is she's done a little bit of a coverage. She's done coverage of a book that talks about and covers the best vegetable-based restaurants in Tokyo. And I can tell you, these things are really, really, really good. And for vegan and vegetarian people, it also helps them to explain, because it's not just a matter of translating the word. People don't understand the concept. You basically have to say you're like allergic to meat to be able to get what you need if you're a vegan or vegetarian. But the book includes tips on making sure that you get vegetarian compliant food. But yeah, this book, Plant-Based Tokyo. And I'm sorry, the book is about vegetarian food in the capital, so there you go. I mean, even better still, but how to make sure that you can order it, where to find it. And honestly, I enjoy the food here. I couldn't even imagine going to a vegetarian restaurant in New Zealand, although it probably actually would be good. Maybe I'll try it now. But it's from being in Japan, actually, hey, Steve from Berkeley, good to see you, and thank you for the thumbs up. But yes, it's definitely worth checking out, and it's worth going to. You don't have to be vegetarian to appreciate it, so check out the book and check out the review by Alicia there. That looks pretty awesome. In Kyushu, there are massive rains. I don't know if any of you guys are in Kyushu or have been there, but actually I spent most of my time when I first got to Japan in Fukuoka, and I traveled a little bit. I saw some friends in Takeo in Saga Prefecture, and they had like crazy rain. Like they had like a whole day of 10 centimeters of rain per hour. And they've had like crazy floods and stuff down there. I hope if you're down there that you're okay. I realize when you're in the middle of this sort of thing, it's like, and this is how it is. There are 670,000 people evacuated. It's a kind of it's a huge thing down there. And I hope everyone affected by it. And in Hokkaido, the same weather system sort of jumped around the Sea of Japan and came back on land in Hokkaido and caused a huge fuss. So please stay safe if you're there. And again, take care. This is the kind of age that we are in. We're seeing these harsh storms being more intense. Again, one of my old jobs was I used to work at the environment team of the risk management consulting company attached to an insurance company, and all the insurance companies that basically whose financial survival is based on modeling forecasts for weather and risk and so on, because that affects the premiums that they charge for insurance. It's clear that not only do they accept completely that climate, human activity induced climate change, but whether you even forget about the causes, although they're of course they're very invested in understanding and remedying the causes, but also just the fact that these kinds of disasters are happening more often, they're costing more when they happen. This is something that actually there is a capitalist angle to it. It costs a lot of money, and ultimately it comes down to the insurance companies, and it's a fact. It isn't just your imagination that you're seeing these things more in the news nowadays. They're happening much more often, and it's another reminder to, of course, be safe and check out the risk profile of where you are moving to or living. Hey Perk, good to see you and everybody. Yes indeed, we have Kay and Kodos up there. Have to jump houses on fire very close by once more. I'm sorry, I'm sure I read that wrong. Have to jump houses on fire very close by once more. Are there fires near you? I guess you're in Australia, so yes, that is something I remember growing up with. I was in Australia during Ash Wednesday in the 80s. And unfortunately, we if it's not one thing, it's another. I guess you don't really hear about forest fires so often in Japan. Although again, there's no reason that there wouldn't be. You get terrible droughts and stuff here, but you certainly get the earthquakes, the typhoons, the wind, the rain, the tornado measurement scale. The movie Tornado. They talk about the Fujita scale. It's a Japanese scale. The Japanese are actually great at coming up with scales for things like for earthquakes and tornadoes and all that sort of stuff. But yes, indeed, bowling alley for disasters. And if you're in Kyushu, take it easy. I must admit, I've been in Japan so long, I do generally have an image that Japan has, a bunch of problems, including, I don't think Japan is necessarily clean either. I mean, corruption and so on is known in Japan, but the idea that Japan's the sort of country where you can pay money to accelerate or get information or an inside track on a visa application, which you can get in countries even like New Zealand, it seems. I don't really have an image of Japan being like that, of having been through the immigration process here. But here you go, a vice minister for the Ministry of Labour was getting kickbacks for providing information and accelerating working visa applications. So he's of course resigned, and hopefully he's going to get prosecuted for that. But there you go, it turns out that there is corruption around immigration in Japan as well. Well, I wouldn't have guessed it. Here's an interesting one. I'm curious, and I want to ask the people out here. Facial recognition cameras. So of course, now lately, when I go through Australia, when I went through Canada, here in Japan, they're introducing more and more. At the Olympics, they're going to have like face scanning, for example, for security purposes. And I know that there's this huge sort of backlash at the moment to facial recognition being used by police, for example. There's cities that are banning it in America, and it's probably in that context that the idea that the airport in Las Vegas is now going to be, or that the TSA, the customs there, is going to be using facial recognition with the security cues, but it's going to be optional, has people thinking, well, this is terrible. There's more and more facial recognition, and while I understand the idea of the data is kind of creepy, or the way that the technology theoretically could be used, I suppose, to track people or to spy on people or monitor people, and people are worried about this kind of future, which it sounds like is actually happening in China, that people are actually being constantly monitored and tracked. At least for now, understanding that it's being used, partly for law enforcement purposes, partly for I guess where I've noticed it the most is going through immigration. I don't know, are people that put out by this for my purpose? I mean, look, they do scans, which I understand is based on your passport photo data and checking that you match the electronically recorded version of your passport photo. And look, if I was given the choice between standing in the TSA queue, which in American airports I've experienced, they're long, they're horrible, the TSA agents, I've never had a problem, but I've heard about terrible things, right? They've got a bad reputation. If I could walk through an automated gate faster, or go through a human, check, I would choose the automated one. I mean, so if it's just to verify that I look like my photo in my passport, I would do that. I would take the facial recognition path anytime. The other thing about this that I personally find a little bit weird is the the idea that facial recognition is scary. And whenever I think about this, I think about just after I came to Japan in the early 2000s, Kim Jong-nam, Kim Jong-il's eldest son, who people originally thought would be his successor in North Korea rather than Kim Jong-un. They thought it'd be Kim Jong-nam. Actually, popular figure in Japan as well, known as Masato, by the Japanese internet. He used to live in Macau and kind of grew up outside of North Korea. And he tried to get into Japan with his family to take them to Disneyland on Dominican Republic passports. And I remember that case because apart from the fact that he got caught by an immigration officer who just recognized his photo and said, "Hey, aren't you Kim Jong-nam?" And at this time, I mean, I didn't know even that Kim Jong-nam existed. He wasn't a famous person. He became famous after this. But there was basically somebody who was kind of aware enough, who was standing at customs at an airport in Japan, that he picked up, he facially recognized, he had a list of photos, I mean, as they all have at immigration, of wanted Red Army terrorists, of wanted, North Korean prominent figures. And he just remembered, he saw somebody who was traveling incognito on a Dominican Republic passport, and he recognized and said, "Hey, I recognize you, you're the son of the North Korean dictator. No, you can't come in on a fake passport." And he was sent away, and this whole incident led to him being passed over for being the next premier of North Korea, and ultimately probably led to him getting assassinated like 20 years later. So it's kind of a significant thing, but what that was kind of a crazy, lucky case of a human-based automated facial recognition. But this is what happens, right? And the other thing about facial recognition is that there are all these cases. I mean, of course, the advertisement for law enforcement using facial recognition is that, like, for example, in Europe, where they've been using it in airports and even online, they've been using it for human trafficking, for women who are being traded as basically sex slaves and being, in prostitution rackets. They can take photos from the websites and match them with missing, claims by the families who are looking for women who have disappeared. And they can help to rescue women being trafficked, and again, or kidnapped children. And so, you've got this thing where, of course, you could have a photograph on every, milk carton in the country like people used to do it. But if you can automate this, there are huge benefits as well. Of course, the conclusion in America seems to be the idea that the police could have automated access to your appearance and your photo, and that they could have cameras everywhere. It's so creepy that they would be willing to give up the benefits of improved law enforcement in order for the knowledge that they're not facing the risk of being tracked. And I don't know, I definitely do not want to be what it sounds like. China has set up in Xinjiang, for example, in Western China, where they've basically got the entire population, if not in concentration camps, under complete control and lockdown. And obviously that's kind of the dystopian extreme that everyone is afraid of, but I think properly used and legislated, and certainly for convenience purposes, if you could speed up shopping with it. I mean, if they've already got my photo anyway, they've got driver's license information and passport information, I would go through an automated queue at an airport if it was faster without hesitation. That's me. I don't know. Do you people disagree? I'm kind of always curious about this. Quinn Rankin says, Andrea Mobile, they do that in China when you lived there a few years ago. Well, that's right. China's kind of famous for taking it the most extreme. Quinn Rankin, those databases won't be hackable, we promise. Well, those databases are already government databases, the driving license databases and the passport ones. This is the point as well. Whether they're connecting to existing databases or not, or creating new ones. Of course, they're doing both. But yeah, Quinn Rankin, a whole bunch of dental records got hacked for ransom a day or two ago, and this is the problem. I mean, this is one of the responsibilities I think should be legislated about, making sure that obliging specific security be taken, that you don't keep files in unencrypted, publicly accessible places. But I don't know. I'm still not quite so put out by this. I find the reaction to it a little bit extreme, but that's just me. 15 things, rude things to not do on trains in Japan. Done from another survey, which last time I looked at this was like 100 like ladies between 30 and 39. So these surveys tend to be a bit. Now I'm kind of curious. So there were 930 responses, and here we go. If you're in Japan, how good are you on your manners? Do you ever do any of these things? I'm pretty sure I'll fail on some of these, but here's a ranking of most frequently done to most frequent, from least frequently named as things that are annoying to most. 11% of responses said reading while the train is crowded. Well, this is more old school. Back in the day on the Chuo line, yes, people would open up double-page newspapers and stuff like that when it was packed crowded. And yeah, I mean, no one really reads newspapers on trains anymore anyway. So I'm kind of like, but certainly opening up an oversized newspaper and bumping up against people is not very cool. Doesn't really happen so much anymore. But yes. Andrew Mobwe, by the way, asking the question, what happens if you get a nose job or Botox done? Good question. Well, I guess when you update your driver's license or your passport, that would come up. There again, it's true. What happens if the photo says that you're not a match for your photo? I assume a human would come in and then you'd have to convince them. But yeah, that would be interesting. Sergeant Booker, if you're going to sit on a plane for 11 hours, you could probably stand in line for 15 minutes longer. Well, that's interesting. I couldn't. I wouldn't want to draw it out. To me, I judge airports by how quickly I can get through them, like either onto my plane or off my plane and out. So personally, I do appreciate about America and Australia, at least being in a queue can be a social event. You can actually strike up conversations with the people around you and have fun, which you never get to do in New Zealand and you never get to do in Japan. So I do like that aspect of it, but yeah, Dan H. A few years ago in Sweden, the entire database of the country was leaked via driver's license records. This included even their spy agency. Well, okay, so that could be used by hackers for facial recognition purposes, but so that's different too. And remember, that wasn't done for facial recognition either. That was just data that was already there. The problem there is driver's licenses. And is your solution, not having driver's licenses? I mean, typically what they do is they access that data for the purposes. And truth is, I think they can only do it. They have to take photos with special biometric scanning cameras in order to really get effective for facial recognition purposes photos. They can't just, they can try, but it won't be as good if they're just using straight up photos. But yeah, I agree that the key is really making sure that the data is secure. He got arrested at the airport, but I got here. Enough, behave perk, but. Yeah. I mean, who knows? I could go full Trump. I could do I could get a wave. That'd be kind of cool. Who knows? I could look like this guy. I could look like the guy in the book. Yeah, I'd get pulled up pretty well. They wouldn't even let me in the country with that. Yeah, maybe I'm against facial recognition after all. Andrea Mowboy agreed. Never stuck up conversations in China airport queues. Oh really? So Chinese aren't sociable like that either. I must admit, I didn't really find that to be a possibility. Well, just partly because I was the only foreigner in the airport when I was in Dalian. Soppy, hey Soppy, good to see you. I don't recognize the name, but good to have you in the chat. And yes, you're ambivalent when it comes to borders, but in cities, object to being scanned by anyone with a view to check whether I'm a criminal. I am not. Yeah. Well, this is kind of interesting as well. So, like there's some people resent in Japan how they put the little tape on the bags when they close it. They put the tape on it to show that you've been at the register and that you've bought what's in the bag. And I remember we did this customarily in New Zealand, at the Japanese gift shop that I worked at, which was not something that most New Zealand shops do. And once there was a New Zealander came into the shop and he bought something, and the Kiwi manager, put a bit of tape on. He's like, "What's with the tape?" And he's like, "Well, it's just to show that you paid for it." And he got all upset. He's like, "Oh, do I look like a thief to you?" My boss came back later and joked to me, "Yeah, he actually did." but he wasn't putting it on for that reason. He was putting it on for every bag. It was part of what we did at the shop. But yeah, well, it's true. That's right. If we think that we don't want to be scanned because we're not criminals, that's fine. But then what if there is a criminal? What if there's a burglar or whatever? What if there's someone who beats you up and runs away? Wouldn't you want them to be caught? I mean, and in the end of the day, you're just automating what humans would do. If there was a police officer standing there on the corner, wouldn't you be thankful if they stopped, if they saw and were able to recognize the person? As opposed to there being no one there, doesn't a camera just automate a process better that humans would do otherwise? So I don't know. I get it. I don't think it's presuming that everyone's criminals, but I do get it. Well, it's just like, at immigration we have to give our fingerprints. why they give out fingerprints? I mean, it's one way to identify, but obviously the goal was to have a fingerprint database for criminal purposes, in Japan back in the day. So that presumption aspect, I agree, isn't cool. But, there you go. Sorry, back to the list. So first is reading on a train. I kind of get that. Now, this is one. A lot of foreigners see that they sell beer at the kiosks and so on in train stations. They think, wow, I can drink beer on the train. So they do. And it's generally frowned upon. But you're right. It's kind of, I've always thought it doesn't look good and people frown when people do it. But if it's people are so against it, don't sell beer in the train stations. But yes, and particularly when people are drunk, when you have already drunk people drinking beer. But this is something where I think foreigners mess up a little bit too much. But yes, indeed, 20% eating on trains. I've been guilty of this. And again, it's a bit of a grey area because that's right, you can get train bentos, of course. But if you're just commuting around Tokyo, the idea of eating on the train is considered not great. Wearing perfume. Yes, well, again, it's like being in the elevator with somebody. I mean, particularly in Japanese trains, you're pressed up against people. It kind of comes off on you. So having cologne or perfume. Yes, indeed. Leaving behind trash. I would put this like at the top of my list. I'm surprised that it's actually not even in the top 10, like leaving trash on a train. I guess people would often leave newspapers or manga that they finished reading in the seats above, in the hangars above. But there you go. Riding the train while drunk kind of links to the drinking one above, but yes, indeed. There again, you can't really do much about it if you've got to get home. Well, just don't get drunk in the first place. But the other problem, of course, is that Japanese, for some reason, I've been drunk on a train and I've been sick in public. But I've always got this idea that if you're going to throw up, you should try to go somewhere where you're minimizing the trouble that you're causing. I don't know what it is with Japanese people that they just go for it in the middle of the train sometimes. Well, that said, you don't really see it as much as you used to. I used to see it quite, maybe some just riding different trains now. But back in the day when I first got into Japan, on the Chuo line in particular, yeah, you'd see it all the time. It was horrible. Where I've been in that situation, I remember running off the train, going onto the platform, finding a rubbish bin, and doing it that way, which I thought was more considerate. But then I remember getting told off by my girlfriend at the time. I was being inconsiderate to the rubbish collector. I'm like, wasn't that better than having 10 million people stand in it on the platform? I don't understand what people are thinking about that. But just to start off, do not ride the train while smash-faced drunk, please. I also used to make it mad dash. I would get that kind of movie Mission Impossible feeling, running up and down platforms, and just when the doors are closing, jumping in, knocking over some children and old ladies and going, yes, not cool. Don't do that. It's dangerous, and people get hurt that way, and it's not cool. Do not jump into the train Mission Impossible style last second. Talking on the phone, using a smartphone, if they mean talking, I kind of get it. And definitely you don't want to talk on trains. That's not cool. I've told you guys before about I was once on a train with a investigator who we were going up into the middle of nowhere, and he was brought in flying in from America to investigate. He was like a prosecutor in America. And I was there as like the local cultural help to help him with these interviews and to translate for him. And it was kind of cool. This guy was like a Long Island, he was like a 6'5", former football player, kind of a Jewish version of the Sopranos. But he had like a Sopranos accent, like this Long Island accent. And we were on this train going up into Chochigi, and we got this call in America, and he didn't realize that you couldn't talk on the train. So we're in the middle of this silent train, and he starts pacing up and down the carriage. Basically, I mean, it sounded like he was ordering a mob hit. He was like swearing. I thought it was cool. It was literally like watching an episode of The Sopranos. Like, you fucking fucks, you tell that fucking guy if he does not pull his arm away. But then all the old ladies were looking at me angrily. They could kind of tell by the eye contact. He wasn't making eye contact, and I was looking nervous, and they could probably detect that I'm the guy he's in with, and I'm looking nervous. So they focus their bad energy on me. Like, tell that guy, and I'm kind of like, I don't know who this person is. Yeah, that was kind of awkward. So there's that. But is this talking about talking, or is this actually talking about actually just using the smartphone? No, they're talking about actually just tapping. Oh, come on. You have to use it. 36% think it's rude to use a smartphone on a train. Screw you guys. Seriously, you can't survive. I couldn't survive on a toilet or in a train without that. I play Fortnite on the train. Holy crap, come on. Okay, applying makeup. This is something you see a lot of girls do. They rush onto the train, kakekomi josha. In the morning, they've got wet hair. They're hurriedly putting on all their makeup. While the train's bouncing around and people. It's like an airplane. When they're in the toilet putting on their makeup with the plane crashing. But it's amazing. They compensate. Even when they move, they'll keep their face perfectly in sync with their eyes so that the mascara is still good. I mean, they actually do it impressively well. But it stinks, and it's like, what the hell is wrong with you? So yes, Andrea's zoning out. We're going to speed it up. I'm going to get to Hong Kong soon as well anyway. I'm going to turn on the aircon, by the way. I turn around. I don't like the extra noise, but I believe it's right now. It's like 29 degrees in here. So I've got to turn that on. Sorry about that. Loud headphone use, getting on or off the train rudely, like bumping into people or shoving people as you get on or off. Putting your bag behind you or on the side so it jabs into people. You're supposed to keep it on your chest or in the overhead baggage. Talking on the phone, definitely bad. Talking in a loud voice with people, don't talk loudly, just don't talk at all, treat it like it's a library. And taking up more than your fair of seat space, spreading the legs, all that sort of stuff. Definitely rude things, don't do these things, be cool. We talked before about the importing of milk and stuff in the TPP deal. So that is happening. This is kind of freaky that scientists have been able to grow like mini brains in labs. He's ordering a hit, indeed. See from Berkeley. Like, trust me, you don't want me to translate this. I mean, seriously, they did not want me to translate this. This is kind of freaky. Did you hear about this? The wave patterns they've gotten from, from basically iPS stem cells that they were able to grow brain. They wanted to practice growing like stem cells, like for the spinal column or whatever, for the nervous system. And so these are basically like embryonic brain organs that they were growing in petri dishes, and they found that the electrical activity after a few weeks of growing cultures of these little brains were the same as embryonic brains in humans, like developing, like, which again, this is only for like, that big in petri dishes. But they've actually figured out ways to culture so that these neutral cells that can be used, the pluripotent cells that can be used to make any part of your body, very root stem cells. They've actually figured out how to grow artificial brains that appear to work, which is just like fast. There's so many things with this. Like, okay, could you grow it? Can it be conscious? I mean, we don't even understand how consciousness works. Here it is, in addition, some cells. And what about the ethics of that? If it is conscious, it's like freaky as anyway. But just the fact that the implications that we can create, like for thinking about people with brain damage, people with spinal injuries and stuff like that, or anything else. There's another story I didn't include here this week, where in Japan they were able to grow an eyeball or parts of an eye that worked and transplant it from someone's own stem cells, and they got their vision from it. So it's actually like freaky and exciting what we're getting into with that. Here's an interesting one. Japan East, the train stations have developed a system where for 980 yen a month, so what about $8, you just pay $8 a month and you get no more than one drink per day, but you get unlimited drinks. Well, one drink per day, up to one drink per day for the entire month, for a subscription fee of $8 a month. So if you are someone who regularly uses vending machines at train stations, this is an excellent deal. And I'm kind of trying to think, I don't use vending machines as much as I used to, but I suppose if I were on this, it would make a lot of sense. This is starting, I believe, from this month, starting from next month, October. I'm kind of curious. I'm thinking, what do people think about this? If you think about, obviously, theoretically you could use it up to 30 times, so you could get like 30 bottles for the price of 8. So it's an excellent deal. It's like a Netflix subscription, though I guess the idea is that they're banking on that it'll be profitable by people not using it too much. And I suppose it depends as well about, so Quint Rankin, about the eye transplants, I think it might have just been like the coronal transplant, something, like part of the eye. But yeah, they're able to restore vision by culturing eye cells, which is kind of freaky. But coming back to this, would you get a subscription to a vending machine? This would give you one drink per day from a vending machine. It's actually pretty. I kind of dismissed it when I first thought of it, but the more I think about it, the more it actually seems like a really good idea. A problem from arriving at Narita. There's two problems that are generally come with arriving at Narita. The first thing is that if you arrive on a train, on a plane that's too late, there are no trains, and you have to figure out you've got a $200 taxi ride or a bus that arrives at 1 o'clock in the morning. Your options are very thin, and this is now being addressed because it looks like the Keisei line is now going to have midnight trains which will go to Ueno. So your options for getting into Tokyo from Narita are going to improve, and that problem is going to become less. And so that is the first problem resolved. The second problem, however, remains that you're in freaking Narita, and why would you ever want to land in Narita? Remember, if you're ever flying to Tokyo, wherever possible, get a flight that comes into Haneda, because you'll save yourself 2 hours of confusion and traveling and money. And Narita is just ridiculous. It's 2 hours away from Tokyo in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by rice fields. I mean, everyone who lands there during the day arrives, and it's like, where the hell is Tokyo? And it's far away is the answer. Just say no to Narita. But if you do, well, you can escape Narita on trains that now run later than before. But yes. Okay, now we're getting the real things, and we've got 2 minutes left on the show. The first thing is, I tweeted, I think I mentioned last week, the news relating to Trump and relating to Korea has been so relentlessly toxic lately. And when I say toxic, it's not even that it's like illogical or bad or whatever. Well, it kind of is, but like I say, it's infuriating, and I realize that just by sharing it and sharing my frustration and exasperation and outrage with what's going on, that makes me feel bad, and I'm spreading the badness. And I realized this was happening too much, so I made a conscious choice this news. I call it my KT diet, my Korea Trump diet. I already make a general policy of not talking about Trump or commenting on that. It's just a black hole with nothing good in it. I added Korea to that list. There are so many crazy things happening involving Korea every day lately. I promised myself, just for an experiment, I'd see if I could go for a week until of not tweeting anything about Korea, just to see if I'd feel better, just because it was kind of so I'd hate myself after I'd tweet about Korea, because I realized how relentlessly negative it was, and I want Japan to have good relations with Korea. So I did that, and I lasted for 6.5 days. I broke it today, partly for this and partly for another story. This guy, you might recall I mentioned on the show a few weeks ago. He was a member of the Ishinakai, an Osaka-based political party. He was on a parliamentary delegation to the occupied islands in northern that Russia has taken away from Japan. He was visiting those islands with the former residents of the islands as a guest of the Russian government. And at a dinner function, he drunkenly suggested in Japanese that perhaps Parliament should debate whether or not to invade the islands militarily and win them back through war with Russia. I mean, we should be debating, is this a policy option that we should take in order to get these islands back? So he was in Russia, drunk, talking about declaring war on Russia, and he was kicked out of the party. He joined the Protect the People of Japan from NHK party, where I assumed he was going to declare his next war on NHK, but instead of that, he actually just proposed yesterday that why don't we invade Takeshima? Of course, Takeshima is Shimane Prefecture, also known as Dokdo in Korean, and known as the Lion Court Rocks to everyone who doesn't want to piss off either country. Have been occupied since 1953 by South Korea, who put was it armed coast guards on there. They shot like 45 people, Japanese fishermen, fishing near the island. So there were actually people killed, and the islands have been held through force ever since. And every time the Koreans ever do anything on it, it's basically Korea's big, hey, screw you, look, we got you back for colonialism. And the Koreans, of course, they argue that the island was legitimately theirs from before. Japan actually annexed Takeshima 6 years before they annexed Korea. But the Koreans argued that was part of the slow plan of annexing Korea, that this was the first part of Korea that they annexed. Japan's always maintained, no, it was just some crappy rocks that they intentionally asserted control over, because they felt they'd had historic control over these rocks in the first place. They can never agree. It's a huge FU point between both the countries, and it's kind of BS. But the funny thing is that just at this time when things couldn't get any worse, the guy from the Protect Japan from NHK party suggested, hey, why don't we have a war? Why don't we debate in Parliament having a war with Korea to take Takeshima back, which would just be the best thing ever for the Koreans. Meanwhile, by the way, one of the things that I refrained from talking about this week, because even though it was so ridiculous, is that America's been criticizing South Korea while they've got this huge campaign of doing everything. They're literally throwing everything they can at Japan at the moment. They've just announced huge military exercises where they're going to practice basically for having war with Japan. They're doing military exercises around Takeshima Island, simulating the Japanese trying to take Takeshima back, and the Korean military using all of its force to push back the Japanese military from taking Takeshima back into Japanese control. So they're having these war games, which the American government criticized as being unhelpful given the overall situation. Korea is there preparing huge military exercises, preparing for war with Japan, and while all of that was happening and no one was paying any attention, it turns out that last month North Korea occupied an uninhabited island of South Korea that's right beside Seoul. It's right beside the marine line. It's just below it on the South Korean side of the marine line that the South Korean. It's part of Incheon. Incheon is an Incheon airport, as in like the airport, like the Narita of Seoul. It's just off the coast from the airport and right beside Seoul. And they've just put a whole military garrison on this island. And they suddenly raised the flag, and someone noticed, holy crap, isn't that our island? But it's got a big North Korean flag on it. So, well, it's like the life of Brian with the Palestinian factions fighting. Let's all remember who the real enemy is here: the the Judean People's Front. It's like, well, Korea's been practicing war games for Japan invading. North Korea just walked in and took a South Korean island, and no one even cares. So that was funny, and that's what made me break my KT diet. I'm going to go back to it. I'm not going to tweet about Korea again for a week, but that was just too much. And finally, indeed, Dan H, why don't they just invade Pearl Harbor? Final one, Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong has been crazy and shitty for a long time, and it's obviously not my thing, so I've refrained from talking about it too much. But and a really interesting thing I mentioned on the show last week or the week before, that I didn't understand why Carrie Lam honestly didn't. She had already constructively acceded to the reasonable requests of most of these, multi-million person marches, which was simply that this bill that the Hong Kong people didn't want passed, to retract it. And she said the bill was dead, she wasn't going to do it, and in the hopes that would pacify it. But everyone kept marching, saying, not until you withdraw the bill from Parliament. We don't want a Patriot Act. We don't want an overnight secret passing of this bill. And she never relented on that, and her not relenting on that or making any further concessions is what's kept these huge protests going all of this time. And there's a story that has been put out here by Reuters the other day, which is leaked by 3 anonymous sources allegedly within the Hong Kong government to Reuters, saying that Carrie Lam had a proposal of making 5 concessions, including withdrawal of this bill, which she had already basically said that she would do, to the Chinese government, and the central Chinese government in Beijing prohibited her from making those concessions. Basically, the reason she hasn't taken any action, and these things have gotten crazier and crazier and kept going, is because, according to this Reuters report, China has actually prevented Carrie Lam from making the concessions necessary to end the protests. And so basically, they've said that her hands are tied. Now, that may or may not be true. Certainly, if they're not true, Carrie Lam is the worst leader of any multi-million person community ever. Just, how can you have a protest over something, administrative, like an extradition bill? How can you have millions of people protesting peacefully and not just simply recognize that that's something you should reconsider doing? And she stuck in with this, and these things have gone on. If that story, however, is true, that not only is she appointed Beijing, but Beijing is actually blocking reasonable attempts to resolve the crisis in Hong Kong. Basically, kind of, again, I don't like to draw the parallel with Tiananmen, but essentially in Tiananmen as well, the Chinese government was torn between people who wanted to sort of take this as an opportunity to reflect and make everything better, and those who felt like this is something that they had to put their foot down and not tolerate because it could be the start of a slippery slope of anarchy. And they chose the latter, and it sounds like the central Beijing in Beijing is treating Hong Kong and looking at the protesters in Hong Kong, who are educated, quite reasonable, and quite peaceful in how they've been protesting, the same way that they looked at the Cultural Revolution. They thought that they were cultural revolutionaries, Red Guards, the student protesters in Tiananmen, and thinking that these are people that need to be, stared down and the stuff that I've been reading the last day, that if this is true, if China is now exercising control over Hong Kong with a mainland mentality, and with that mainland style authoritarianism, well, everyone thought they had until 2042 before the two systems, one country system would end. And remember, this is not just about Hong Kong, this is about Taiwan as well. It's about the KMT, which has got is currently looking good for doing well in the elections in January, who are in favor of gradually reintegrating with China. They're essentially a mainland party. This is what it looks like. Two systems, one country in Hong Kong is meant to be an advertisement for the 23 million people in Taiwan to feel safe reintegrating with China, and here is China dealing with its first real challenge, and with the people in Hong Kong, even the ones appointed by Beijing, realizing the way that they have to deal with it and being blocked from doing so. It kind of shows that China can't, or at least the Communist Party in China can't not be authoritarian, even to the non-authoritarian parts of its territory. Like they can't recognize that it's a better outcome at the end of the day to make a concession. It's not looking weak to make a concession when you're clearly wrong. But of course, when you're an authoritarian government, that's a very hard thing to do, and they can't show that mindset, and they can't leave Hong Kong alone to sort it out. So what I'm hearing about in the last couple of days that's really disturbing is, one, that it sounds like Beijing is blocking compromise that would resolve the Hong Kong crisis, which in a way is bringing to a head what would have happened in 2042 anyway, which is the reason young people are protesting, because they're worried that this is going to be the kind of authoritarian future that they're going to have to deal with 20 years from now, and they're trying to set a precedent to make sure that Hong Kong has some kind of established autonomy that remains. That's why they're fighting for that now. But then you've got the other aspects of, China's been putting out these videos of, militarized police or police units that are within the military and Shenzhen training. And, again, I realize there's information warfare coming here, but what I'm seeing are tweets showing riot police in Hong Kong, including the riot police that broke into the subway and started randomly beating people on the subway, not even arresting them, just beating them with sticks, leaving them bloodied up and running off. And they were speaking in Mandarin, they weren't speaking Cantonese. And the theories going around is that China's now putting Shenzhen military police into Hong Kong uniforms and riot uniforms. That's why they're covering their faces, and they're sending them in there, and now they're having them just rough up the protesters, and beating them up and trying to suppress it. And again, if that's happening, then well, again, it looks like 23 years earlier, it's 2042 already. And I mentioned on Twitter tonight, my dad was living in Hong Kong about 10, maybe 15 years ago, and I went over there a couple of times, and he lived on Lantau Island. Lantau Island is a separate island from the main part of Hong Kong. It's where the airport is. And there used to be these little offshore, these kind of weird expat communities on that island. And they were really isolated, and I asked my dad, why would you live here in this weird sort of expat community, gated community in Hong Kong? Hong Kong's a really interesting place. Why wouldn't you live in Hong Kong? And he was saying, well, everyone who lives here because they're afraid that one day Beijing might just decide two systems is over and they're just going to march in, and we want to be as close to the airport as possible when that happens. So he was there paranoid about the idea of Beijing kind of storming in. Yet that appears to be what happens. I've heard some people say that Britain should do something about it. I don't really see what Britain can do about it. They can't really make China do anything now. And frankly, I've talked before, the only concession I can make to China on this is that Hong Kong should never have been a British colony in the first place. Obviously that is a historical injustice, even though it worked out for well in many ways for Hong Kong. I guess if Britain really cares about this, and they should pay attention, these are still two systems. These are still people who are essentially under a British system based on British sovereignty. They should be giving everyone their passports and giving them the option to leave. I don't know that simply supporting Hong Kong from abroad can really do very much if China is going to decide that they're going to turn Hong Kong into another Xinjiang, for example. I really hope, obviously, that improves. Quinn Rankin points out, yes, not all the protesters are peaceful, and yes, there's controversy about this. I mentioned the other week the protesters who took a truncheon off a police officer and started hitting him with it at the airport, triggering their shot in the airport. Yeah, that wasn't cool. And obviously, when you've got millions of protesters, there are going to be a couple of idiots. But obviously, when you look at those million-person protests with no disruption, that's amazing. That would be impossible in any country. New Zealand or Australia, just through drunkenness, there would be issues. So that's amazing. The other thing that's kind of interesting is, of course, the photos of the people throwing Molotov cocktails who have police side guns still on them. and the conspiracy theories that that China is planting protesters, that the people who were throwing the firebombs were police planted there to sort of be instigators. Who knows? I mean, like I say, it looks very much like Russia. I mean, not exactly, obviously, with Russia invading Crimea. Crimea was actually still a separate, country at the time. But the idea that Russia infiltrated Crimea with people wearing neutral uniforms who just sort of popped up in positions, and then one day they said, "Hey, we're in control now." It looks very much like that's what China's doing with Hong Kong. And other than, I don't really know what we can do other than just support, moral support for them. But it's scary, and it's a huge betrayal of the promises that China made to the people in Hong Kong, and I think it's going to really undermine their long-term hopes of reunification with Taiwan, which I worry could force that into a similarly, conflict-oriented solution, which I don't know, no one wants. So I really hope that China can see its better interest, and indeed the government of Hong Kong, which I still think has the control over the situation more than anyone else, and I hope it can get resolved. But there's a lot of comments I want to catch up on later. But does China want compromise? Asked Quint, and it's a good question. Well, there have been times in history where China's made huge compromises. I mean, China switched to being socialist with Chinese characteristics. They switched to capitalism. They're capable of making huge changes, but right now, I must say, China probably is much more authoritarian now. Certainly from Jiang Zemin and now under Xi, it's much more authoritarian now than I think it's been in the past. And this has also proven a myth, the idea that we believed from the 80s and 90s, that if we just may help China develop and become rich and well educated, that they'll naturally become more democratic and respectful of human rights. And clearly that's not true, or that was a misplaced expectation. All the more reason I believe and continue to believe that the international community should support and recognize Taiwan. I realize that the very awkward position that Taiwan's in, that Taiwan itself doesn't know if it wants to be recognized as independent or not. There are a lot of mainland people who moved to Taiwan in the 50s, and there's a lot of people in Taiwan who are ambiguous about whether they want to assert independent Taiwanese identity. But I don't know, to me, unfortunately, I mean, we were all hoping that Hong Kong would be the test case that would prove that somehow that there would be a greater reunification, and it would be kind of safe for everybody to come in and everyone would improve and become more democratic together, and it looks like that's not the way it's going. So, this is really, really important. It affects a lot of people. Taiwan's the population of Australia. Hong Kong's the population of 2 New Zealands. Pay attention, and hopefully governments can help the people there in the way that we can help them, but hopefully the people there will see what's going on and do the right thing. So that is my feeling on all of that, and that's the end of the show. Don't mean to be talking about China at the end there, but very, very worrying stuff. And again, I just hope that people can hope some sanity can come back into the situation in Hong Kong, because it doesn't need to be. People don't need to be looking at those protesters as any sort of a threat. They've got reasonable demands that there's no big issue with conceding to. So hopefully people can see that, and hopefully calm can restore it, but we'll see. And with that, I'm going to say goodnight. It's been, actually I said I would be short tonight, and I wasn't. It was 15 minutes over, but important topic there at the end. It's very, very late for everybody. Remember, if you like the show, remember, click on like. I really do appreciate and love all of your comments. Thank you so much for that. Let me know what you think in the comments if you're watching this recorded. Let me know if you've got things for me to do in Seattle as well, or if you're in Seattle, message me up. It'd be cool to meet if it's possible to meet while I'm there. Otherwise, keep cool till after school. Ka kite anō, and boom, peace. Ending the show. Boom.